So today we're talking about metrical patterns in Shakespearean drama. So Shakespeare uses language in a variety of really cool ways, and one of those is a combination of verse and prose. So when we look at Shakespearean verse, one of the terms we need to understand is iambic pentameter. Remember that an iamb is a unit of rhythm consisting of an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. So any of these words or phrases are iambic, right? Annoy, pretend, to dream, I wish. Pentameter means there are 5, that pattern repeats 5 times in a line. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks. So we can see how this pattern works. I'm exaggerating, but obviously that's how the words are stressed. So when we have iambic pentameter, but the lines do not rhyme, it's called blank verse. For days shall quickly steep themselves in night, for nights will quickly dream away the time, and then the moon, like to a silver bow new bent in heaven, shall behold the night of our solemnities. And you see how it changes a little toward the end, but this is clearly written in a pattern. Even though it doesn't rhyme, it has a clear pattern, and that would be considered blank verse. Now, why does Shakespeare use different kinds of writing here? Well, he uses verse to do a number of things. One of those is to express really deep emotion. So if you're feeling something really strongly, then you want to express it in special language. So Shakespeare does that. Often noble characters are the ones that do this. Noble characters are more likely to speak in verse to show that they are thinking at a high level, that they are more organized, that they are higher quality, so they speak in higher quality. And they would have been more educated anyway, so that's a little bit more realistic, although of course no one actually speaks in verse. But sometimes common characters do speak in verse for the situation merits it or the particular character. Verse is also used to make wise reflections. So if someone is making a particularly astute observation on life, then they're likely going to be using verse because they are using fancy thoughts. They're going to use fancy language to show those. Sometimes there are poems that are part of the text, or a song, or even a play. So there's a work of literature, a literary work that's being recited within the play, and those are often going to be in verse as well. Occasionally, Shakespeare is going to use verse to show irony, to show that a character is two-faced, or to show that the class of a character doesn't indicate quality. And sometimes he uses verse to show that someone's a very persnickety character. They're extremely organized. They do everything exactly just so, perhaps uptight you might call them. And to show how organized they are and how they have every little thing perfect, then he also has them speak in a very clear pattern to show that even their thoughts are extremely organized too. Shakespeare, of course, also writes in prose, so anything that's not in verse is in prose. So he has his characters speak in prose sometimes if they're just making a regular life discussion, see who's at the door, pour me more wine, things that just they're not fancy, right? Or kind of in that same mode, making quick replies, ordinary everyday conversation. Those things don't require verse, and sometimes they're so brief that you couldn't really make them in verse because you don't have enough of the speech to have a pattern. Sometimes he breaks into prose just to relieve the ear. So I think when you're reading a lot of Shakespeare, sometimes you get into that rhythm, and you kind of get stuck in it, and then you realize, wait, I've been kind of lulled into it's like being rocked back and forth, right? I've been lulled into a sort of trance here, and maybe I need to go back because I haven't actually paid attention to what I'm reading. It can be tiring, so breaking into prose once in a while can help break that pattern. And you'll notice that the verse doesn't actually follow a pattern usually. It has a few places where it strays from the pattern too. So it might be mostly iambic pentameter, but there's an extra syllable in this line, and then that line is only half length, something like that. But also stopping the verse and moving to prose for a little while can help provide a bit of a break. Sometimes Shakespeare has characters speak in prose to show that they are not capable of thinking as complexly as someone who speaks in verse. So maybe they're crazy, perhaps senile, or they're drunk, or they're just a stupid character. So they're just incapable of thinking at a fancy way that someone would think if they were speaking in verse. So it's to show that lower level. And of course, Shakespeare being Shakespeare, sometimes he just writes in prose to show you that he can write really well in prose too. So that's about what you'd expect from Shakespeare. So we're going to look at a few passages, and for each of them we're going to think about the style that they're written in, why they're written in that style, who's speaking, what's happening, how that style relates to the content, and how that style influences characterization. So this is from A Midsummer Night's Dream, and this is Helena's speech. How happy some or other some can be, through Athens I am thought as fair as she. But what of that? Demetrius thinks not so. He will not know, but all he do know. And as he errs doting on Hermia's eyes, so I admiring of his qualities. Things base and vile, folding no quantity, love can transpose to form and dignity. Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind, and therefore is winged Cupid painted blind. And if you look at this, you can say, okay, right away we can tell there's a pattern. This is written in iambic pentameter, right? How happy some or other some can be. So we have that up and down. You can count the syllables and see there's 10 per line, and that's usually a pretty good indication that's probably iambic pentameter. Now, is this in blank verse? No, because remember, blank verse does not rhyme. This is in rhymed verse. So it's not blank verse, but it is in a pattern. It is in verse. So we can ask ourselves, why might this particular passage be written in verse? And here are some thoughts. First of all, Helena is a noblewoman, so we say, okay, obviously that makes her more likely to be speaking in verse. Secondly, what is she talking about here? Well, she's upset because she loves this guy who loves someone else. And even though he loves someone else, she says she still loves him, and she doesn't judge him harshly because she's looking at him with the eyes of love. So she's speaking about some really deep feelings here. And because she's speaking about deep feelings, it makes sense that she would be speaking in a more poetic way, right? Because we see poems as being somewhat more dramatic, right? She's being more dramatic. She's expressing her feelings in a strong way. Here's another segment that we're going to be looking at, a couple of different characters. I'm not going to read the whole thing. We have a fairy. Either I mistake your shape in making quite, or else you are that shrewd and knavish sprite, called Robin Goodfellow. Are you not he that frights the maidens of the villagery? So you'll see that this is, again, rhymed couplets. Then we have Puck's reply. Thou speak'st to right, I am that merry wanderer of the night. I jest to Oberon, and make him smile, when I a fat and bean-fed horse beguile, neighing in likeness of a filly foal. So you see this exchange is clearly written in verse as well. Now these characters are not noble characters, but they are a fairy. They are both fairies. So fairy is just a fairy, right? And Puck is a fairy. So it makes sense that they would be speaking in verse as well, because you imagine fairies, it makes sense that they'd be speaking in verse, right? They're kind of out of this world. They're kind of different. They would do something like speak in rhyme. In this case, it's less to be lofty, right? It's more to emphasize their playfulness. So the fact that they're talking about how Puck is a trickster and here's all the things he does that are silly, right? So he neighs like a girl horse and makes a boy horse fall in love with him, those kind of silly things. So he's expressing that in verse. Here's another pair that's especially interesting. We have an exchange between Bottom and Titania. Now remember, Titania is the queen of all the fairies, and Bottom is a carpenter who has wandered into the forest, and of course, Puck has transformed him to have the head of a donkey. So when Titania wakes up, she says, "What angel wakes me from my flowery bed?" Now this could be our prose, right? Everyday exchanges. It's very short, but if you look at it, it also could be considered iambic. I mean, it's not more than one line, but it is iambic pentameter if you look at the stresses. What angel wakes me from my flowery bed? And that makes sense since she is a fairy and, a queen, right? And then we have Bottom come in. The finch, the sparrow, and the lark, the plain-song cuckoo gray, whose note full many a man doth mark, and dares not answer nay. So we see this part is clearly rhyming, and it also follows a pattern, although it's not long enough to be iambic pentameter. Now, Why is he doing that? Why, it's a song, right? So of course we have some verse here. But then he stops the song. For indeed, who would set his wit to so foolish a bird? Who would give a bird the lie, though he cry cuckoo never so? And you'll notice there that we have some more of prose, where he is not speaking in any kind of pattern. And of course, that's what we expect from a commoner and one who is being portrayed as being especially stupid, too. And then we have, again, another demonstration here of her. I pray thee, gentle mortal, sing again. Mine ear is much enamored of thy note. But then bottom, methinks, mistress, you should have little reason for that. So there's a nice contrast when you have Titania and Bottom communicating in A Midsummer Night's Dream, because you see how she speaks in more verse and he speaks in more of prose. So as you're looking at As You Like It, also pay attention to when Shakespeare is making the character speak in verse versus when he is making them speak in prose. And any Shakespearean text that we read or you read on your own, because whether it's in verse or prose can signal some important messages.